A black waitress refused to serve a billionaire CEO, but when the truth about her past came out, it left everyone speechless. Sometimes the person you overlook is the one who could save your entire empire. In the gleaming marble halls of the Metropolitan Business Club, Patricia moves silently, her worn black shoes padding softly against floors that cost more than most people's homes. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across mahogany tables, where million-dollar deals are struck over afternoon tea. The air smells of expensive cologne, aged leather, and the kind of privilege that money can't quite buy but somehow always manages to rent. Patricia has worked here for 8 years, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while tech moguls and oil barons discuss mergers that could reshape entire industries. She's 42 with graying temples she keeps neatly pinned back and hands that have learned to be invisible, even while they work. The members walk past her like she's part of the furniture. Useful, necessary, but never truly seen. No one knows that Patricia once held patents worth millions. No one even notices that she pauses sometimes when they discuss quantum computing architectures, her dark eyes sharpening with recognition. But when the club's most powerful tech executives struggle with a problem that's been haunting Silicon Valley for months, she listens from the corner where she's polishing silverware. "The quantum decoherence is killing us," mutters Richard Blackstone, CEO of Nexus Technologies, his billion-dollar empire built on innovations he barely understands. "We're losing quantum states faster than we can stabilize them. 3 months behind schedule and the board is breathing down my neck." Patricia's hand stills on the crystal glass she's cleaning. Those words aren't foreign to her. They're the language she once spoke fluently, the equations she used to dream in before life forced her to trade algorithms for aprons. "If we can't solve the decoherence problem by next quarter, we're looking at a complete project failure," continues Dr. Amanda Hayes, Nexus's chief technology officer. $50 billion in research funding down the drain. Patricia moves closer, ostensibly to clear their table. The technical specifications they're discussing float past their lips like poetry she once wrote. Error correction protocols, quantum gate fidelity, topological qubit architectures. Her heart beats faster with each familiar term. What they didn't know was that Patricia had spent 15 years developing solutions to exactly these problems at MIT's quantum computing laboratory. What they couldn't see was that the woman refilling their coffee had once been featured on the cover of Scientific American as one of the quantum computing pioneers under 40. She whispers, barely audible, "Topological stabilization through Majorana fermion braiding." The conversation stops. 5 pairs of eyes turn to her with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. Patricia feels the familiar heat of embarrassment creep up her neck. But something else stirs too. Something that's been sleeping for years. "Excuse me?" Dr. Hayes says, her voice sharp with the particular kind of irritation reserved for interruptions from the help. Patricia looks up, meeting their gazes for perhaps the first time in 8 years. "I said topological stabilization. You're approaching decoherence from the wrong angle. You're trying to prevent it instead of working with it." Richard Blackstone's laugh is cold, dismissive. "I'm sorry, but I don't think the waitstaff needs to concern themselves with quantum mechanics. Perhaps you could focus on refilling the water glasses." The words sting, but they also ignite something Patricia thought had died long ago. She nods politely and steps back. But her mind is racing through calculations, through solutions these brilliant minds can't see because they're looking at the problem through the wrong lens entirely. And with just those few whispered words, she was about to change everything they thought they knew about quantum computing and about the woman they'd been overlooking for 8 long years, because sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come from the most unexpected places, and the person you dismissed today might be the genius you desperately need tomorrow. If this story moves you, hit that subscribe button. We share incredible stories of overlooked heroes every week. These are the stories that remind us that brilliance doesn't always wear expensive suits or speak in boardroom voices. Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments and tell us about a time you witnessed hidden talent being dismissed. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job, your appearance, or your background? Your stories matter and they inspire our next videos. Let's build a community that recognizes genius wherever it hides. Patricia Williams had worked at the Metropolitan Business Club for 8 years, arriving each morning at 5:30 a.m. to prepare the dining rooms before the first members arrived. She polished silverware until it gleamed, arranged fresh orchids in crystal vases, and made sure every detail was perfect for men and women who wielded more power before breakfast than most people saw in a lifetime. The irony wasn't lost on her. She served coffee to people who made decisions about technologies she had helped invent, technologies that now generated billions in revenue for companies that had never heard her name. Richard Blackstone walked by her as if she were a shadow, his Armani shoes clicking past her cleaning cart without so much as a glance. Dr. Amanda Hayes ordered her Earl Grey tea, with the same casual indifference she might show to a smartphone app, useful when needed, forgotten the moment the task was complete. But Patricia watched. She always watched. The Metropolitan Business Club was more than just an exclusive dining establishment. It was where the titans of American industry came to think out loud, to share problems that kept them awake at night, to seek solutions that could make or break their empires. And Patricia, invisible in her black uniform and sensible shoes, had become the most well-informed person in Silicon Valley by accident of proximity. She knew about Blackstone's quantum computing project before most of his own board members did. She'd overheard the initial funding discussions, the recruitment of Nobel laureates, the ambitious timelines that grew more impossible with each passing month. She'd watched Dr. Hayes' confidence slowly crack as the technical challenges proved more daunting than anticipated. On that Tuesday afternoon in October, Patricia heard something that made her hands tremble slightly as she arranged fresh lilies in the main dining room centerpiece. "The quantum decoherence is killing us," Blackstone was saying to Hayes and 3 other executives at the corner table. "We're burning through $50 million a month and getting nowhere. The quantum states collapse faster than we can measure them." Patricia moved closer, ostensibly to adjust the place settings at the adjacent table. Those words weren't foreign to her. They were the vocabulary of her former life, the language she'd spoken fluently during 15 years at MIT's quantum computing laboratory. "The error rates are astronomical," Dr. Hayes continued, frustration evident in her voice. "We're talking about decoherence times in the microseconds. No quantum algorithm can run long enough to be useful." Patricia's breathing quickened. She could see the solution as clearly as if it were written on the pristine white tablecloth before her. The answer wasn't in preventing decoherence. It was in embracing it, in designing algorithms that worked with quantum noise rather than against it. She whispered almost to herself, "Topological stabilization through Majorana-Fermion braiding." The conversation stopped as if someone had pulled a record needle across vinyl. 5 pairs of eyes turned to her. Blackstone's cold and calculating, Hayes' sharp with academic arrogance, the others somewhere between amused and annoyed. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Dr. Hayes asked, her PhD from Caltech evident in the way she pronounced each word with crystalline precision. Patricia felt her cheeks warm. 8 years of invisibility had made her forget what it felt like to be truly seen, especially by people like these. But something in her refused to back down completely. "I said topological stabilization. Instead of fighting quantum decoherence, you design your qubits to be inherently protected by their topological properties. Majorana fermions are naturally resistant to local perturbations." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Richard Blackstone leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Not pleasant, but predatory. Well, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It seems our waitress has been reading Scientific American in her spare time. How quaint." Dr. Hayes laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Patricia, is it? That's very sweet, really. But quantum computing isn't something you pick up from popular science magazines. These are problems that have stumped some of the brightest minds in physics." "Perhaps," suggested Dr. Marcus Webb, Nexus's chief operating officer, "you could focus on what you're actually paid to do?" "I believe our water glasses are empty." The words hit Patricia like physical blows, each one designed to put her back in her place, to remind her of the invisible boundaries that separated the servers from the served. She nodded politely, her training in customer service overriding the fire building in her chest. "Of course, sir. My apologies for the interruption." She moved away, ostensibly returning to her duties, but something had shifted inside her. For 8 years she had accepted her invisibility, had made peace with the fact that her brilliant mind was now employed in tasks that required only her steady hands and pleasant demeanor. But today, for the first time in nearly a decade, she had spoken her native language again. Patricia walked back to the service station, Her mind racing through quantum field equations and topological invariants. She filled their water glasses with mechanical precision, but her thoughts were light years away, dancing through mathematical spaces where particles existed in superposition, and information traveled instantaneously across infinite distances. That wasn't just embarrassment burning in her chest. That was something else entirely, something that had been dormant for so long she'd almost forgotten its name. That was ambition finally waking up. 20 minutes later, the Nexus Technologies executives still lingered at their corner table, their voices growing sharper as the magnitude of their quantum computing crisis became increasingly clear. Patricia moved between the other tables with practiced efficiency, but her attention remained tethered to their conversation like a satellite locked onto a signal. The Department of Defense contract specifically requires fault-tolerant quantum computation by March, Dr. Hayes was saying, her usually composed voice showing cracks of strain. If we can't demonstrate stable quantum states lasting at least 10 milliseconds, we lose everything. $200 billion in future contracts gone. Richard Blackstone's fingers drummed against the mahogany table, each tap echoing like a countdown timer. What about the IBM collaboration? The Google partnership? They're facing the same wall, replied Dr. Webb, loosening his silk tie. Quantum decoherence is the Mount Everest of physics problems. Everyone's trying to climb it, but the bodies keep piling up at base camp. Patricia found herself drifting closer again, drawn by a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. The technical details they were discussing painted a picture she knew intimately, a landscape of failed experiments, theoretical dead ends, and the slow realization that conventional approaches to quantum error correction were fundamentally flawed. Without thinking, she spoke again, her voice quiet but clear. You're still thinking classically about a quantum problem. This time the silence felt different. Less surprised, more dangerous. 5 pairs of eyes fixed on her with the intensity of laser beams, and Patricia felt the weight of their collective attention like atmospheric pressure. Excuse me? Dr. Hayes's voice could have frozen nitrogen. Patricia's hands tightened on the water pitcher she was carrying, but she pressed forward. Your error correction protocols assume you can isolate individual qubits from environmental interference. But quantum systems aren't isolated. They're fundamentally entangled with everything around them. Instead of fighting that entanglement, you should be using it. Richard Blackstone stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across her. Miss Williams, sir. Miss Williams, I'm trying to understand what's happening here. Are you actually presuming to lecture Dr. Hayes, who has a PhD in quantum physics from Caltech and has published over 40 peer-reviewed papers about quantum mechanics? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Patricia could feel the eyes of other club members beginning to turn their way, sensing drama. She could retreat now, apologize again, return to her invisible role serving people who would forget her existence before their dessert course arrived. Instead, she heard herself saying, "Anionic statistics. That's what you're missing." Dead silence. Then Dr. Hayes laughed. Not the crystalline sound from before, but something harsher, more cutting. Anionic statistics? You're talking about theoretical particle physics that exists only in 2-dimensional systems. We're building actual quantum computers, not writing fantasy novels. Actually, Patricia said, her voice gaining strength, anyone's can exist in certain 3-dimensional systems under specific topological conditions. And if you create qubits using anionic braiding patterns, their quantum information becomes topologically protected. Environmental decoherence can't destroy information that's encoded in the braiding structure itself. The entire dining room had gone quiet now. Conversations at other tables trailed off as members sensed something unprecedented happening. The help was talking back, using words that sounded important and complicated. Dr. Webb's face flushed red. This is absolutely ridiculous. We're sitting here discussing classified defense research while the waitress plays pretend scientist. Patricia, Richard Blackstone's voice was silk over steel. I think there's been a misunderstanding about your role here. You're employed to serve food and clear tables, not to interrupt private business discussions with amateur theories you've picked up from Wikipedia. These aren't theories from Wikipedia, Patricia said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. These are solutions to problems I've been thinking about for 15 years. Dr. Hayes leaned forward. her expression shifting from annoyance to something resembling scientific curiosity, though still laced with skepticism. 15 years? And where exactly did you spend these 15 years thinking about quantum decoherence? Patricia met her gaze directly. MIT Quantum Computing Laboratory. Under Professor Chen's supervision. The statement landed like a physical blow. Dr. Hayes blinked, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the first flicker of uncertainty. That's impossible, she stammered. Professor Chen's lab has only worked with the absolute top minds in quantum physics. Graduate students from Harvard, Princeton, Caltech, and me, Patricia said quietly, for 15 years, until I left. Richard Blackstone's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Left, or were you asked to leave? Because I find it highly unlikely that someone with legitimate expertise in quantum computing would choose to spend their days serving coffee and clearing tables. The words hit their intended target. Designed to humiliate, to remind everyone present of the natural order of things. Waitresses didn't lecture billionaire CEOs about advanced physics. The help didn't interrupt their betters with solutions to problems worth billions of dollars. Patricia felt the familiar shame creep up her neck. But underneath it, something else was stirring, something that had been sleeping for too long. You're right, she said, setting down the water pitcher with deliberate care. Someone with my background wouldn't choose this. Life doesn't always give us choices. Mr. Blackstone. She turned to walk away but paused, looking back over her shoulder. But just so you know, the solution you're looking for isn't in preventing decoherence. It's in designing computational architectures where decoherence becomes irrelevant. Topological quantum computation using non-abelian anyons. The theoretical framework already exists. You just need someone who understands how to implement it. Patricia walked away, her heart hammering against her ribs, leaving behind 5 of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley staring after her in stunned silence. That wasn't embarrassment burning in her chest anymore. That was dignity, and it felt like coming home. In her modest one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from the Metropolitan Business Club, Patricia sat at her small kitchen table with a leather-bound notebook she hadn't opened in over 8 years. The cover was worn smooth from handling, and inside, pages of elegant equations filled every margin, the mathematical poetry of quantum mechanics written in her careful script. On the first page, a newspaper clipping had been carefully taped. MIT researcher develops breakthrough in quantum error correction. Below the headline was a photo of a younger Patricia, her smile radiant as she stood next to the quantum computing array that had consumed 5 years of her life. The article described her work on topological quantum computation, research that had put her on the cutting edge of what many considered the most important technological revolution since the invention of the computer. Back then, quantum mechanics wasn't just her profession, it was her language. She dreamed in probability amplitudes and woke up with solutions to problems that had stumped Nobel laureates. Her colleagues at MIT called her the quantum whisperer because she had an almost supernatural ability to understand how quantum systems would behave under different conditions. The pages of her notebook were full of diagrams that looked like abstract art to most people but represented breakthrough, insights into the fundamental nature of reality. Quantum circuit designs that could maintain coherence times measured in seconds rather than microseconds. Error correction codes that could protect quantum information against any conceivable form of environmental interference. Theoretical frameworks for building quantum computers that would make today's most advanced systems look like pocket calculators. Her work had attracted attention from technology giants around the world. Google, IBM, and Microsoft had all tried to recruit her. The Department of Defense had classified several of her papers because the implications for cryptography and national security were so profound. At 30, she had been featured on magazine covers and invited to speak at conferences where her presentations left audiences of brilliant physicists struggling to keep up. The last time she had touched this notebook, she'd been Dr. Patricia Williams, principal research scientist at the MIT Quantum Computing Laboratory, holder of 7 patents that were revolutionizing the field, and the mother of a 6-year-old daughter who was showing early signs of a rare genetic disorder that would require a lifetime of specialized medical care. Patricia turned the page and found herself looking at a different kind of mathematics Insurance forms, medical bills, treatment schedules. The numbers told a story that was both heartbreaking and pragmatic. Her daughter Maya needed experimental treatments that cost more than a university professor's salary could provide, even with insurance. The specialized therapy programs, the round-the-clock nursing care, the adaptive equipment, it all added up to a financial reality that even her impressive MIT salary couldn't sustain. She remembered the night she made the decision. Maya was sleeping in the hospital bed, connected to machines that monitored every breath, every heartbeat. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about a new treatment protocol, but it would require Patricia to be available 24 hours a day for the next several years. Not just available, physically present, emotionally present, completely devoted to her daughter's care in a way that a demanding research career simply wouldn't allow. Dr. Williams, the lead physician, had said gently, "I want you to understand that Maya's condition will require your full attention. The treatment windows are critical, and missing even one could have serious consequences." Patricia had looked at her daughter's peaceful face and realized that all the quantum computers in the world meant nothing compared to this small person who needed her completely. The choice, when it came down to it, wasn't really a choice at all. She'd submitted her resignation from MIT the next week. Her colleagues were stunned. She was leaving at the peak of her career, walking away from research that could change the world. The department chair had tried to negotiate, offering reduced teaching loads, flexible schedules, sabbatical years. But Patricia knew that half measures wouldn't be enough. Maya needed her completely, and Patricia would give her everything. For 5 years, she had been exactly what Maya needed: physical therapist, medical coordinator, educational advocate, and source of unlimited love and patience. She'd learned to measure success not in publications or patents, but in small victories. Maya taking 3 independent steps. Maya speaking her first complete sentence. Maya laughing at a joke only she understood. When Maya passed away at 11 years old, surrounded by love and having experienced every moment of joy that medical science and unlimited maternal devotion could provide, Patricia found herself in a world that had moved on without her. The quantum computing field had advanced in directions her research had predicted, but her colleagues had scattered to private industry. Her lab had been reorganized, and her cutting-edge expertise had been overtaken by new discoveries. She was 41 years old with a resume that ended 8 years ago and a broken heart that made it difficult to care about anything beyond basic survival. The job at the Metropolitan Business Club had been a lifeline: steady work, health insurance, a reason to leave her apartment each day. For 8 years, she had served coffee to people who were implementing technologies she had helped invent. She'd listened to them struggle with problems she could solve in her sleep. She'd remained invisible, partly by choice and partly by the assumptions of people who couldn't imagine that brilliance might wear a server's uniform. But this afternoon, for the first time since Maya's diagnosis changed everything, Patricia hadn't felt invisible. She had spoken her native language again, had felt the electric thrill of engaging with problems that challenged her intellect. For a few moments she had been Dr. Patricia Williams again, and the feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying. She closed the notebook and looked at the photo of Maya that sat on her small table. A beautiful child with curious eyes and an infectious smile. Maya had been gone for 3 years now, and Patricia realized that she'd been sleepwalking through life ever since, content to exist in the margins of other people's achievements. "I didn't leave quantum mechanics, baby girl," she whispered to the photograph. "Quantum mechanics never left me. I just had to walk away for love." Patricia opened her laptop, a modest machine that was nonetheless capable of running complex simulations, and began to type. Equations flowed from her fingers like remembered music. Elegant solutions to problems that had consumed billions of dollars and thousands of brilliant minds. In that quiet apartment, surrounded by the modest possessions of a waitress who had once been a quantum computing pioneer, Patricia Williams began to plan something that would shake the foundations of Silicon Valley. She was about to remind the world who she really was. The Nexus Technologies campus was still wrapped in pre-dawn darkness when Patricia stepped out of her 15-year-old Honda Civic at 4:47 a.m. Security cameras tracked her movement as she walked across the pristine parking lot, her breath visible in the October morning air. She wore her Metropolitan Business Club uniform, black slacks, white shirt, sensible shoes, but carried something that would have puzzled anyone watching. A worn leather messenger bag containing her old MIT laptop and notebooks, filled with equations that could revolutionize quantum computing. She entered the building through the service entrance, using the vendor access code she'd overheard Dr. Hayes mention during a phone call about catering deliveries. The quantum computing laboratory was on the 15th floor, and Patricia took the stairs to avoid security cameras in the elevators. 15 flights later, her heart was pounding, not from exertion, but from anticipation. The laboratory was a cathedral of modern science. Towering quantum computers housed in cylindrical dilution, refrigerators that cooled their qubits to temperatures colder than deep space. Fiber optic cables snaked across the floor like technological arteries, carrying laser light that controlled individual quantum states. The air hummed with the sound of pumps and electronics maintaining the delicate conditions necessary for quantum coherence. Patricia had spent countless hours in labs like this, but she'd never felt quite this sense of homecoming. She approached the main quantum computer, a custom-built system worth $50 million, and connected her laptop to the diagnostic interface. No hesitation. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, implementing quantum circuit designs she'd perfected 8 years ago, but never had the chance to test at this scale. The solution wasn't elegant in the conventional sense. It was revolutionary. Instead of fighting quantum decoherence, she was designing computational protocols that treated noise as a resource rather than an obstacle. Her approach used topological quantum error correction based on surface codes, but with a twist that only someone with her specific background would consider. She was implementing anionic braiding operations that created computational spaces where quantum information became immune to local perturbations. The qubits weren't isolated from their environment. They were entangled with it in precisely controlled ways that made the entire system more stable, not less. For 3 hours, Patricia worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon, implementing quantum algorithms that existed nowhere in the published literature. Because they came from her own unpublished research, she uploaded error correction protocols that could maintain quantum coherence for minutes rather than microseconds. She installed quantum gates that performed braiding operations on non-abelian anyons, creating computational architectures that were topologically protected against decoherence. When she finished, Patricia looked at the diagnostic readout and felt tears sting her eyes. Coherence time 8:47 seconds. Error rate less than 0.01%. The quantum computer was now capable of performing calculations that had been purely theoretical just hours before. There was nothing else to say. She quietly disconnected her laptop, gathered her notebooks, and left the way she had come. At 8:15 a.m., Dr. Amanda Hayes arrived at her laboratory with her usual large coffee and the tension that had become her constant companion over the past 6 months. The Department of Defense deadline loomed like a storm cloud, and every day brought them closer to what looked like inevitable failure. She nearly dropped her coffee when she saw the diagnostic display. "What the hell?" she whispered, leaning closer to read numbers that seemed impossible. Within minutes, her entire team had gathered around the quantum computer, their voices rising in excitement and disbelief. Word spread through the building like wildfire. Someone had solved the decoherence problem overnight. The quantum computer wasn't just working, it was performing beyond their most optimistic projections. "This is impossible," breathed Dr. Marcus Webb, staring at coherence measurements that should have been physically unattainable with current technology. "These error rates, these braiding operations. Who has access to this lab?" Security footage was pulled. Access logs were checked, but the person responsible had been invisible to their electronic surveillance, moving through their building like a ghost who understood their systems better than they did themselves. "Look at this code," Dr. Hayes said, scrolling through the quantum algorithms that had been uploaded. "This isn't just advanced. This is years ahead of anything in the literature. These topological error correction protocols, I've never seen anything like them." Richard Blackstone arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by frantic phone calls from his research team. He stood in the laboratory, surrounded by quantum computers that had been transformed overnight from expensive failures into revolutionary successes. "Who did this?" he demanded. "We don't know," Dr. Hayes replied, "but whoever it was has just solved a problem that's been stumping the entire quantum computing industry. This isn't just a breakthrough, It's a paradigm shift. The implications hit them like a tsunami. The Department of Defense contract was no longer in jeopardy. It was essentially guaranteed. The error rates they were seeing meant quantum computers could finally perform the complex calculations needed for cryptography, drug discovery, weather modeling, and artificial intelligence. They weren't looking at months of additional research. They were looking at immediate implementation. Run a full diagnostic, Blackstone ordered. I want to know everything about these modifications and find out who has the expertise to implement solutions like this. But even as his team scrambled to understand what had happened, a nagging thought tugged at the back of Richard Blackstone's mind. Yesterday's confrontation with the waitress replayed in his memory. Her confidence when discussing anionic statistics, her casual mention of topological stabilization, her claim about 15 years at MIT. Dr. Hayes, he said slowly, remind me what that woman said yesterday. The waitress? What exactly did she propose? Dr. Hayes consulted her notes, her expression growing increasingly troubled as she read. Topological stabilization through Majorana-Fermion braiding. Anionic statistics. She said we should design computational architectures where decoherence becomes irrelevant. The silence in the laboratory was deafening. 5 of Silicon Valley's most brilliant minds stood surrounded by quantum computers that had been transformed by solutions they dismissed as impossible just 24 hours earlier. Find her, Richard Blackstone said quietly. Find her now. They pulled the security footage from the Metropolitan Business Club first, then cross-referenced employee records until they found her address. Patricia Williams, age 42, 8 years of employment as dining service staff. No criminal record, no higher education listed on her application. That's impossible, Dr. Hayes muttered, staring at the sparse file. Someone who can implement quantum algorithms like this doesn't just appear from nowhere. Richard Blackstone's investigation went deeper. Within hours, his corporate security team had uncovered what Patricia's job application had carefully omitted. 15 years at MIT's quantum computing laboratory, 7 patents in topological quantum computation, 43 published papers in theoretical physics, and a research reputation that had made her one of the most respected quantum physicists of her generation, before she vanished from the academic world without explanation. Dr. Patricia Williams. Blackstone read from the report, his voice growing quieter with each revelation. Ph.D. in theoretical physics from Harvard, postdoctoral fellowship at CERN, principal researcher at MIT from 2006 to 2014. She pioneered work on topological quantum error correction that's cited in over 300 papers. Dr. Hayes was scrolling through Patricia's academic publications on her tablet, her face growing paler with each paper. These are foundational works. Half of our current research is built on theories she developed. She's not just an expert. She's one of the pioneers of the entire field. And we've been treating her like... Dr. Webb couldn't finish the sentence. Like a waitress, Blackstone said grimly. Because that's what we saw when we looked at her. The realization settled over them like a heavy blanket. For 8 years, one of the world's leading quantum computing experts had been serving their coffee, clearing their plates, and listening to them struggle with problems she could solve effortlessly. They had been so blinded by their assumptions about service workers that they'd completely missed the brilliance standing right in front of them. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, Patricia was summoned to the Metropolitan Business Club's private conference room, not as staff, but as a requested guest. She sat across from Richard Blackstone, Dr. Hayes, and Dr. Webb, her worn leather notebook resting on the polished mahogany table between them. The atmosphere was unlike anything Patricia had experienced in 8 years at the club. Instead of casual dismissal or condescending tolerance, she sensed something that felt almost like reverence, and a hefty dose of embarrassment. Ms. Williams, Richard Blackstone began, then caught himself. Dr. Williams, I believe we owe you an apology. Patricia's expression remained calm, but her hands folded carefully in her lap. 8 years of invisibility had taught her to be cautious about sudden attention from powerful people. You want to know who I am? She said quietly. So I'll tell you. She opened her notebook, revealing pages of equations that looked like abstract art to most people, but represented breakthrough insights into the fundamental nature of quantum reality. I spent 15 years at MIT developing theoretical frameworks for topological quantum computation. My doctoral thesis was on using anionic braiding operations to create error-corrected quantum processors. I held 7 patents in quantum error correction, published 43 papers, and my research formed the foundation for most of the quantum computing work being done today. Dr. Hayes leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her embarrassment. Your 2011 paper on surface codes. It's cited in almost every modern quantum error correction protocol, including the ones your team has been struggling to implement. Patricia replied. The solutions you uploaded this morning are based on research I completed in 2013 but never published. Why? Dr. Webb asked. Why didn't you publish? Why did you leave MIT? Why are you working as a waitress? Patricia's composed facade cracked slightly, and for a moment the pain of old decisions flickered across her face. My daughter Maya was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder when she was 6 years old. The treatments were experimental, expensive, and required round-the-clock care. I had to choose between my career and my child's life. The silence in the room was profound. These were people accustomed to making calculated decisions based on market forces and profit margins, but they recognized the weight of a choice that transcended any business consideration. I spent 5 years being Maya's full-time caregiver, advocate, and medical coordinator. I learned to measure success not in publications or patents, but in small victories. My daughter taking her first independent steps, speaking her first complete sentence, laughing at jokes only she understood. Patricia's voice grew softer but stronger. When Maya died 3 years ago, I found myself in a world that had moved on without me. My research had been incorporated into commercial applications. My colleagues had scattered to private industry, and my expertise felt like memories from someone else's life. The job here provided health insurance and stability while I figured out what came next. She looked directly at Richard Blackstone. I didn't leave quantum mechanics. Mr. Blackstone, quantum mechanics never left me. I just had to walk away for love. The confession hung in the air like a physical presence. Here was someone who had sacrificed a career that could have made her wealthy and famous for the sake of a child who needed her completely. Someone who had chosen love over ambition and had paid for that choice with 8 years of invisibility. Dr. Williams, Richard Blackstone said, his voice carrying a humility that few people had ever heard from him. We've been fools. Worse than fools, we've been blind. You've been solving our problems from the shadows while we've been stumbling around in the dark. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Those modifications you made to our quantum computer represent $1 billion breakthrough. The Department of Defense contract alone is worth $200 billion over the next decade. You've just handed us the key to quantum supremacy. Patricia met his gaze steadily. I didn't do it for you, Mr. Blackstone. I did it because the problems were there, and I knew how to solve them. It's what I do. In that quiet conference room, surrounded by leather-bound books and oil paintings of long-dead industrialists, they finally saw Patricia Williams not as the help who had interrupted their important conversation, but as the quantum computing pioneer whose brilliance had been hiding in plain sight for 8 long years. The next morning, Patricia stepped into the Metropolitan Business Club like always, arriving at 5:30 a.m. to prepare for the breakfast service. But something was fundamentally different. Word had spread through the exclusive membership faster than quantum. Entanglement, the waitress who had been dismissed and condescended to, was actually one of the world's leading experts in the technology that would define the next century. She was polishing silverware in the main dining room when the first members began arriving for their morning meetings. But instead of the usual casual indifference, conversation stopped when she entered. A hush fell over the room. And then something unprecedented happened in the 8 years Patricia had worked there. Spontaneous applause. The sound started with Dr. Margaret Chen from Stanford's physics department, who had actually cited Patricia's research in her own work, without ever realizing the author was serving her coffee every Tuesday. It spread across the dining room like a wave, growing stronger as more members joined in, until the entire room was on its feet. Dr. Williams called out Senator James Harrison, chairman of the Senate Committee on Science and Technology. I believe we owe you considerably more than an apology. Patricia stood frozen, the crystal water glass in her hand reflecting the morning light streaming through the tall windows. For 8 years she had been invisible in this room. Now she was the center of attention in a way that felt both terrifying and liberating. Thank you, she said simply. her voice carrying across the hushed space. "But I still have tables to serve." That afternoon, the Metropolitan Business Club held an emergency board meeting that would become legendary in Silicon Valley folklore. Richard Blackstone stood at the head of the conference table, addressing an assembly of tech moguls, venture capitalists, and industry leaders. "Yesterday we learned something that should humble every person in this room," he began. "For 8 years we've been in the presence of one of the most brilliant minds in quantum physics, and we treated her like she was invisible because we couldn't see past her job title." The room was dead silent. These were people who prided themselves on their ability to identify talent, to spot the next big breakthrough, to invest in revolutionary ideas before anyone else recognized their value. Dr. Patricia Williams has single-handedly solved the quantum decoherence problem that has been holding back the entire industry. Her modifications to our quantum computer represent advances that are years ahead of anything in the published literature. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Effective immediately, the Metropolitan Business Club will be establishing the Patricia Williams Institute for Quantum Research, with an initial funding of $50 million. Dr. Williams will serve as director, with complete autonomy over research priorities and hiring decisions. But Patricia had one condition, which she delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had learned to value what truly mattered. "I'll accept the position under one condition. The Institute will prioritize research that serves humanity, not just profit margins. We'll work on quantum algorithms for drug discovery, climate modeling, and educational applications, and we'll ensure that brilliant minds from unconventional backgrounds have opportunities to contribute." The applause that followed was different from the morning's, deeper, more respectful, acknowledging not just her technical brilliance but her moral clarity. 2 weeks later, Patricia stood at the podium of Stanford University's largest auditorium, facing an audience of 1,200 people, physicists, engineers, students, and technology leaders who had come to hear the woman who had emerged from invisibility to revolutionize quantum computing. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her service uniform, and her graying hair was loose around her shoulders rather than pinned back in the severe style required by club dress codes. But her most striking accessory was confidence, the quiet assurance of someone who had reclaimed her rightful place in the world. 8 years ago, I made a choice that seemed to end my career in quantum physics, she began, her voice carrying clearly to the back of the auditorium. I chose love over ambition, family over fame, and caring for my daughter over advancing my research. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. I was told by well-meaning colleagues that this choice would destroy my career, that stepping away from active research would make me irrelevant in a field that moves at light speed. They were right about the career consequences, but they were wrong about the irrelevance. She clicked to her first slide, a photograph of Maya, smiling in her wheelchair, surrounded by quantum computing textbooks. "My daughter Maya taught me that brilliance isn't diminished by love, it's refined by it. The 5 years I spent as her caregiver didn't make me forget quantum mechanics. They taught me to think about science as service, research as responsibility, and innovation as a tool for improving lives rather than just generating profits." Patricia clicked to her next slide, the quantum coherence measurements from the Nexus laboratory. The breakthrough that solved the decoherence problem didn't come from another 10 years in an isolated laboratory. It came from understanding that quantum systems, like human beings, are not meant to be isolated. They function best when they're connected, entangled, and working in harmony with their environment. She paused, looking out at the audience of brilliant minds who hung on her every word. "For 8 years, I served coffee to people who made decisions about technologies I had helped invent. I was invisible to them not because I lacked expertise, but because they couldn't imagine that a waitress might understand quantum mechanics better than they did." The auditorium erupted in sustained applause, but Patricia raised her hand for quiet. "I'm not telling you this story to embarrass anyone or to celebrate my own vindication. I'm telling you this because there are Patricia Williams in every restaurant, every office building, every service job in America. Brilliant minds hidden by assumptions about education, background, and social class." She clicked to her final slide. The future of inclusive innovation. The next breakthrough in quantum computing might come from a janitor who studied physics at night school. The solution to climate change might be conceived by a taxi driver who immigrated here with an engineering degree that isn't recognized. The cure for cancer might be discovered by someone currently considered too young, too old, too unconventional, or too invisible to be taken seriously. The entire auditorium rose to their feet in thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever. Patricia still arrives at work early each morning, but now she walks into the gleaming glass towers of the Patricia Williams Institute for Quantum Research, where her name is etched in granite above the entrance. The building hums with the sound of quantum computers and the excited conversations of researchers from around the world who have come to work on problems that could reshape humanity's future. Every morning, she stops by the small cafe on the first floor where she knows the staff by name and asks about their families, their dreams, their ideas about the research happening in the floors above them. Because Patricia remembers what it feels like to be invisible, and she's determined that brilliant minds will never again be overlooked simply because of the job they happen to hold. Young physicists seek her guidance, drawn not just by her technical expertise but by her story of perseverance through loss and her commitment to using science as a force for human good. Remember that quantum mechanics teaches us that everything is connected, she tells them. Your research doesn't exist in isolation. It's entangled with the lives it will touch, the problems it will solve, and the people it will help. The Institute has become legendary in Silicon Valley, but not just for its groundbreaking research. It's known as a place where janitors with engineering degrees are invited to contribute to projects, where security guards with mathematical insights are encouraged to attend seminars, where the woman who cleans the laboratories might be the one who suggests the solution that breaks open a new field of study. Patricia's quantum computers now achieve coherence, times measured in hours rather than microseconds, enabling calculations that were purely theoretical just 2 years ago. Her research has led to quantum algorithms for drug discovery that have accelerated the development of treatments for rare genetic disorders on work she dedicates to Maya's memory. But perhaps her greatest achievement isn't scientific. The Patricia Williams Foundation now provides scholarships for students from unconventional backgrounds who want to pursue careers in quantum physics. Former service workers, immigrants with unrecognized degrees, parents who interrupted their careers for family responsibilities, people who were told they were too old or too different to contribute to cutting-edge science. Her story reminds us that genius doesn't always wear expensive suits or speak in the vocabulary of privilege. Sometimes the most powerful discoveries come from minds that have been shaped by love, loss, and the kind of wisdom that can only be earned through genuine sacrifice. The most revolutionary ideas often come from the most unexpected places, and the person serving your coffee today might be the scientist who solves tomorrow's greatest challenges. What hidden talents are you overlooking in your own life? What brilliant minds are you dismissing because they don't fit your expectations of what expertise looks like? In a world that often judges people by their job titles rather than their capabilities, Patricia Williams stands as proof that true brilliance cannot be contained by circumstances, and that sometimes the most important discoveries come from hearts that understand what really matters.